go. Excellent. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome. Hello to everyone. As I just said a moment ago, if you're just joining us, I'm a little rusty on Zoom, so a lot of buttons, but that's okay. I'm going to drop some links that I'll share a few times here, but in case I miss anyone, a couple more times. That is a link to today's presentation and also a link to the agenda and the resource bank. We're on sort of a tight timeline, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. And we'll start with some introductions. So if you don't mind, if you could introduce yourself in the chat over there by answering 4 questions, basically everything that is on the screen right now. So your name, your pronouns, where and what you teach. And then if you could just answer one question, the connections question today is, when you were a student, what was your favorite class to talk in? When you were a student, what was your favorite class? So we'll take a moment. I'm going to answer our questions in the chat box so you can meet your peers. Second. Good morning. Some more folks. Awesome. Hello, everyone. Hi, Penny, Chris, Jennifer, Olga. I missed some folks. Shirley, Jennifer, Carl, Melanie, Jennifer. A couple Jennifers here. Hello, hello. Oh, English. Here's some links I'm dropping in the chat. If you're just joining us, what you're doing right now, we're introducing ourselves with our name, pronouns, where and what you teach. And then if you could just answer this one question in the chat box, connection question for today. When you were a student, what was your favorite class to talk in? When you were a student, what was your favorite class to talk in? You can drop your answers briefly in the chat. Oh man, so many people. This is exciting. And you can see my answers on the screen, but I'll go ahead and answer them. So art makes sense. Yeah, perfect. So my name is Ryan Acosta-Fox. Pronouns are he, him. I teach English at Northwood High School. And oh man, when I was a student, my favorite class, debate, easily. Debate was my favorite class to talk in. I teach English now, but I think ironically, I probably learned more about reading and writing from debate, just because I had a really vibrant teacher who I really connected with. And yeah, so that was it for me. I love all the answers I'm seeing though. Art and math. I'm gonna go ahead and drop the links if you're just joining us. This is a link to today's presentation and also to today's agenda and resource bank. And what we were doing, if you're just joining, is introducing ourselves by saying our name, pronouns, where and what you teach. And then if you have an answer for this question, what was your favorite class to talk in when you were a student? You can drop that in the chat also. And we're going to go ahead and start. And I want to share the agenda and the objectives for today. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about what I just did there with the connections question, because that kind of gets to a really big part of what I'm going to talk about today. Socratic seminar, connections, every voice, seminars where every voice can be heard. So what I did there with that question is, first off, I snuck in some context. I made it kind of sneaky, right? So I framed what our conversation is going to be about today. Our conversation today, we're going to talk about talking, basically. We're going to talk about how we would talk in a class, how we would structure talking in a class. Also, you keep it short. You don't want to ask an essay question there, just enough for students to kind of get going. So you could probably answer that question fairly quickly, I would say. You do, at the same time, though, you want to avoid yes or no questions because you will have students who just say yes or no. You want to try and make them think a little bit more deeply than that. And then to sort of contradict number 2, I would say that the last one is I would give it space. Now, let's say that we were doing this seminar in person, in real life, and this is for in real life, in-person seminars. What I would do, let's say that someone has a story about this class they spoke in, and they was a horrible experience where the teacher, made them speak out loud, and they were terrified about speaking out loud. And this story went on for like 2 minutes or something like that. Honestly, I think I would give it some space and like see what conversations can develop from from where that goes. So today, unfortunately, we can't do that because we've only got the 30 minutes, but yeah, so if you're just joining us, I'm sharing a couple links in the chat over here. It's a link to today's presentation and today's agenda and resource bank. And so far, all we've talked about is the thing called the connections question, which I'm going to circle back to here in a few minutes. So for today's agenda, I first, in a moment, I want to talk about the resources I'm going to share with you. Then I'm going to spend some time talking about the history and philosophy behind these two Socratic seminar structures. How and why did they come about? I want to break down two different lesson plan protocols I'm going to share with you, one for Socratic seminar and then one for a sort of experimental idea I'm calling connections. And lastly, I'll reserve hopefully the last 5 minutes for answering any questions, but because we're on a tight timeline, if we run out of questions, I am available all the time to talk about seminar. It is my favorite thing in the whole world. So for real, almost, I guess. But yeah. For objectives, by the end of this session, we will, first, we're going to learn about a method of student-centered discourse that seeks to engage every voice in class discussion. And perhaps more importantly, you will walk away with 168 lesson plans, 128 from this 4-volume series called that we called Socratic Seminar. I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. And then 40 new lesson plans that are a little bit experimental. Perhaps more importantly, you'll walk away with 2 lesson plan templates that you can use and modify for your own classes. Okay, so that is our objective for today. Still got a couple people joining us. Cool. Welcome. Hello. I'm seeing some familiar faces. Welcome. It's nice to see you. I'm going to go ahead and drop a link in the chat. The links in the chat again. Next this. And in the agenda or in the presentation, you'll find these links. The first is to the Socratic Seminar folder that has 128 different lesson plans. I'll explain why that number is so precise here in a moment. It also has, sorry, I'm spamming the chat right now with links. I'm a little out of practice on Zoom, everyone. I apologize. So it also has a link to the Connections Curriculum folder, which right now has 40 lesson plans. And then there's 2 discussion log data trackers that I'll talk about how to use those. And then perhaps most importantly, I would say we have 3 blank templates. One is the new one, which I just sort of prefer. There's some kind of cosmetic changes. The other is the older Socratic Seminar template. And then the last one is the discussion template that I use that is in the experiment R&D phase. So, all right. Before we get into the structure of it, I want to talk a little bit about the history and also the philosophy behind these 2 different lesson plan templates. So history in brief, I'll try and be brief, but this is my 15th year teaching. I started teaching at Washington High School in Kansas City, Kansas. And back then, the Kansas reading assessment was really, really big, mattered a lot, had a lot of weight at our school, and our scores were low. So we wanted to help, ameliorate our reading scores. So we knew of our former principal, who was now at a school called Van Horn High School in Kansas City, Missouri. He had started a Touchstones Curriculum whole school discussion seminar initiative to tackle literacy, reading, writing, and discussion. So we went over there, we observed what it was like, and it was truly a formative experience for me. I was still a young, I think I was my 3rd year teaching, and I was in just a regular old senior homeroom advisory classroom, and students were discussing ancient Greek philosophy. I think it was Aristotle. That name rings a bell to me that they were talking about. And as a young teacher, this was a mind-blowing experience because it vastly expanded my frame of reference for what students were capable of talking about. To see students talk about Aristotle with, frankly, more authority than I could talk about Aristotle was really, really an exciting experience. So we came back to Washington High School and we decided we want to do this. We're going to do this Touchstones curriculum. And what we did is we had homeroom twice for I think 60 minutes on Wednesday and 30 minutes on Thursday, if you can believe it. And once a week, every Wednesday, we engaged in a whole class discussion seminar, everyone in the building, every homeroom teacher and every classroom, from seniors who were in college lit to quote unquote on-level freshmen. I don't like the phrase on level, but for lack of a better phrase, on-level freshmen. Everyone in the building was engaged in the same Socratic seminar discussion. We started by using what's called the Touchstones Curriculum, which was developed, I think, in the 1980s by people at St. John's College, and we liked it. We liked what it offered. There were some bumps in the road, and we learned that there were some things we wanted to alter for our own purposes. Okay, so some things we kept from their ideas. The basic format, the basic structure, right? The initial question, the connection question, a central text that you would annotate and discuss, and then we finish with some reflection questions. We also kept broadly, it's a sort of context-free philosophical focus. So you're not really learning about Aristotle so much as considering one of Aristotle's ideas, right? We did make some modifications that we felt we needed to make to help speak more closely to our students, right? So we updated the texts over time from classic text to modern texts. We wanted to diversify the voices that were represented in the curriculum, right? It was, they have their theory behind it, but it was a very much, the names in the curriculum were Aristotle, Galileo, Shakespeare, Descartes. It's from the traditional canon, right? We taught at a school, it's very diverse schools, 70% African-American, 20% white, 10% Hispanic, approximately 10% Hispanic and 10% Asian. And we wanted to include more voices so that the student body could see themselves in the text we were considering. So we updated the text, but we also wanted to make sure, working together to develop, to avoid at all costs being condescending in the text we chose, right? So diversity of content as well. What I mean by that is, like, sometimes I've, seen situations where you might have diverse, have an African-American text, but limit what they're speaking, what the author is speaking to the Black experience in the United States, right? And then you get Galileo talking about his principles of whatever it is Galileo talks about, and then you bring in Maya Angelou, and she speaks again to the Black experience in the United States. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't limiting the content. There's no reason that Maya Angelou can't also talk about, scientific principles, or the text that we have for her is actually, I think, is about home and the concept of home, and where it is and how it lives with us. And it's one of my favorites. It's beautiful. So those were some modifications we made. As a result, we did this every week. Everyone in the building did this. So we needed 4 volumes, because a freshman, we couldn't repeat the same lesson plans the next year. People would get really tired of that. So we needed 32 lesson plans per year, 8 per quarter, to allow for, whatever kind of days that happen. This leaves us with 128 lesson plans, no skips, no repeats. And that's what I'm sharing with you today in part. We developed this philosophy democratically over time. At first, we sort of were trying to model ourselves after Van Horn, but we realized that what we wanted, we sort of realized the power of Socratic seminar over time. And our philosophy became, I tried to convey it as best as I could, but our philosophy really was that seminar is founded on the idea that through their words, ideas, and questions, students might reveal themselves, not just to others, but to themselves. Rather than teach students how to think, the goal is to create and facilitate a dialectical space for students to interrogate their world and understand it as an individual and shared experience. We didn't really talk about social and emotional learning at the time, but I know now that what we were doing is the work of social and emotional learning. Students were practicing key elements of SEL, building and maintaining a community, developing healthy intellectual and emotional relationships with peers, managing their responses and talking, identifying opportunities for both personal growth, but also collective change. As my the person at Van Horn, my mentor, the person who hired me, one of my favorite people, Dr. Netzer put it, once a person begins to live the life of the mind, there is no going back. So I think I might have had one or two people just join us. So I'm going to share the link again in the chat. I want to talk about the two different protocols I'm going to share with you. The first is the one that I've just been talking about, the 128 lesson plan ideas. I'll share a new link with you. Here is a sample seminar. Put this over here. There you go. That you can look at. But each seminar has 6 parts to it. It takes approximately 45 minutes to do a one Socratic seminar. You start with the connections question. You read and annotate a passage of about 100 to 300 would be pushing it words in length for about 8 minutes. You come up with an individual question. You go around, you share out your questions to the whole class. And then we have a large group focus conversation for about 15-ish minutes. And then we reflect for about 10. So let's look at that seminar. So, the old ones have these like teacher guides to them that could be useful for you, hopefully. They are, like I said, this was, the whole school did this. So even teachers who were really resistant to doing this, it was an obligation for them to do it. So we try to make it as user-friendly as humanly possible. I'll talk more about that here in just one moment, actually. So this is a sample seminar from Maya Angelou text called Letter to My Younger Self. And we would start by saying, start with the connections question. And I want to pause for a moment, and you'll note that, like I just said, this was designed for basically anyone could facilitate this within reason. All you really need is a facilitator and a timer. And for a couple of reasons. First, like I said, some teachers were a little resistant to this idea. So we wanted to make it's kind of a well-made sub-plan in a way. You could verbatim read the instructions, read the text, and as long as you're timing things correctly, you're ready to go. On the flip side of that is we actually had student seminar leaders, and they would go to classes and facilitate discussions. So we wanted to make it also user-friendly for them as well, so they could read this. So I would say in a discussion circle, everyone shares a short answer to the question below. In this piece, Maya Angelou writes a letter to herself as a child. What's one piece of advice you would give your younger self, right? So we've talked about the connections question already. So kind of hints at the subject matter, sort of provides a little bit of sneaky context. That takes about 5 minutes. We'll go around and share. I'll usually tell students, talk for about 10 seconds, right? So 5 or 10 seconds. So a short answer. For step 2, we read and annotate a passage. One person reads the piece out loud. I usually start the year by doing that myself, but then I'll kind of hand off to other students as the year goes on. Everyone silently annotates. We mark at least 3 things and write a comment for each. So read that. And then if you read it out loud, that'll probably take you about 2 minutes, which gives you about 5 to 6 minutes of quiet annotation time. What I tend to do is blend the next step with step 2. Near the end of that timer I have going, I'll say like, all right, I'll look around and say, I can still see about 50% of our pencils moving. If you haven't flipped to the back to answer the question for step 3, it says to create an individual question you could share with the class and write it below. For example, do you feel that you can always go home after you leave? And then maybe adjust the timer if I need to, or kind of feel out where everyone is, right? Now we get to step 4, and this is where we share out our individual questions. I'll say each seminar member shares her or his or their question. I updated it in the new one. Note 5 interesting questions by writing down the speaker's name. And that's an important thing there. I always tell them, please don't write down the question verbatim because you will miss out on the next 6 questions, right? So we just go around in a circle and share our questions. Now I'm going to pause because this for me is the magic every voice step. And I mean that word magic pretty directly. So I was really shy when I was in high school. I didn't like talking out loud in front of class. And I can speak from experience. If I'm doing this seminar and I'm really, really shy, I am staring like a deer in headlights at step 5, which is the whole class discussion. It's a little awkward at times. There's not a lot of direction. Students can just sort of speak when they're ready to speak. That's kind of freaking me out a little bit. So I'm not really sure about that. And it's sort of like a magician's sleight of hand that I'm not really paying too much attention to step 4, right? So I can't explain it, but for step 4, I tend to have 95% or 100, usually close to 100% of students doing it. I don't have a lot of people passing on the individual question, right? And the level of question you get from students is often jaw-dropping how deeply they're thinking about this question. Even your students who are nervous to share out loud, or maybe sometimes especially those students, will have this really, really advanced question. So if we get through step 4 with 100%, close to 100% of students sharing out, I'm kind of personally on cloud 9 because we've kind of already done it. I think we've already got all the voices have shared. And then we get to step 5, which is hard, is a process, we would say. But anything that happens in step 5 is either cake, it's great, we'd have a cool conversation, or it could just go poorly, and then it's a learning experience. But we will have gotten through step 4 where we've shared out. So, and then step 6 for us, we use journals at the time. It'll look a little different for you. Back then we used to ask specific questions to the text. Now I tend to ask questions closer to these to reflect on the conversation itself. And for the 128 lesson plans, I have some context, although I don't for all of them, because the whole point is sort of context free. So that's a sample Socratic seminar. Now, there's a new one I'm going to share with you also, and this is experimental, very new. I finished making this about a couple weeks ago. I tried it a couple times in class. And I've liked it so far, but it's sort of an experiment. So in a connections discussion, I was thinking, so currently I'm a resource teacher, but next year I'm going back to just teaching in the classroom, and staring at the prospect of having my own homeroom finally for the first time since Kansas City that I can really call my own. And I'm very, very excited about that. So it got me to thinking about what would a discussion seminar look like in a 30-minute environment. I knew I couldn't just do a Socratic seminar because it's designed for 45 minutes. It just wouldn't work, right? So I came up with a connection curriculum that modified it, format that modified it to 3 steps. We start with the connection question, takes about 5 minutes. That's basically exactly the same. We have a 15-minute annotation and discussion round. And then we have a 5-minute reflection discussion round. And there's also a space for spacing out or mindfulness on the back. We'll talk about here in a second. But you can kind of see it looks like this. Connections question hints at the discussion we're going to have. In this passage, Gloria Angelou talks about how important her language is to her. Have you ever been mocked because of the way you speak or write? That's a question. This one comes from unit 3. So theoretically, it would be the 3rd unit of the year. So I would maybe put a trigger warning on that. I don't know if I want to. I'd have to feel out. I might need to modify the question if I felt like it was going to be a little too heavy for us. The one thing you have to do, I thought, was shorten the text. So this is the text. I thought we could talk about something as short as a quote, maybe something as long as a short paragraph. And then we have I have a scaffolded way of annotating it, right? So what questions, confusions, similarities, and differences. So what questions does this reading spark? What confusions does it have? Or what's confusing about it? How are you similar to the speaker? How are you different? If you're using this in like a science classroom or gym or English, even English, this is kind of more designed for homeroom. You could alter the questions to however you see fit, really, right? So maybe you're studying some particular skill in English and you want them to look in at, it's been a little while since synecdoche. I don't know. What synecdoches do you notice? Although that would probably not be a great discussion, but and then the reflection question is, I was thinking write down an answer to the question below rather than keeping a journal, be kind of time consuming. Then we could just kind of talk about it. We could share out our answers. What's your favorite question from today? Why were you interested in it? What did you like about the discussion? How could it have gone better? Was there anything you wanted to say but couldn't? And did you change your mind about the reading after talking about it? So the design here was a 30-minute discussion seminar. I can say that having done it a few times, I like it. And the only thing I will say is that starting it during quarter 4 is that this step took a lot of modeling. on the whiteboard. So I was modeling for my students what I would do here. That just stands to reason you would need to do that. It just felt a little weird to be doing that in Q4. I imagine at the beginning of the year, there'll be a lot of modeling, and hopefully over time, we kind of understand the framework for how to, how we go about annotating. Okay, last thing I'm going to share is a data tracking tool that I have made. This really is identical for both Seminar and Connections. And I will say that it is definitely a analog document. It is meant to be printed out. It's not a digital document. It's meant to be printed out and written. And unfortunately, I don't have a digital accessible one yet. That I need to learn more how to do that. So, but the goal here is to sort of track how the conversation goes. And you can put lists. I like to list initials. I can do that really fast at this point. I'll track the number of comments. Add up total comments, how many times they spoke unprompted or how many times they were called on. And I keep a little circle in the top right because I like to sort of, I'll put initials in the circle and track which way the conversation goes. So I'll notice little patterns here, right? So like maybe the conversation mainly stays over here. And there were some people talking over here, but it was kind of off topic. I don't know. And it'll kind of help me understand. This is a very holistic data tracking document, but it helps me out. I grade out the bottom part here, and I usually just keep notes here at the bottom. So, I forgot about, this is an experiment. I put on the back here some just kind of like connections, crosswords, Sudoku. No, not crosswords. Word search, connect the dots. I try to connect the dots one? This because it's homeroom advisory if you want to zone out and be on doing some connect the dots. I'm totally fine with that. I might delete it in an English class, although I tried it and it's like a magnet. Kids are very interested. Their pens were drawn to the connect the dots stuff. So anyway, I think that is about it. I will say I have a couple minutes for questions, 3 minutes or so. But I do want to just say that talking about Seminar, as you can see, is my favorite thing in the entire world. I will drop everything to do it for real, for real. If you want to talk to me about it at greater length, please send me an email. I'd love to chat. I'm happy to talk over the phone or Zoom, or I could even, in theory, come out to your school. I don't know. So, I remembered. I forgot. So also, if you don't mind, if you had time, they want us to share this survey link. But okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop talking now. So what if you had I had a moment for questions. If anyone wanted to share or ask me anything, I'm here to help. So, hey, Josh. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes, it is my favorite. The sleight of hand is magic. So. Oh yeah, you definitely have to push back. Sometimes responding to teachers. This was like a whole school mandate. So if you can imagine, there were definitely some resistant teachers, but the best thing to do, if you can get a good group of students to demonstrate it, then that is easily the best selling point. Like I was sold seeing students at Van Horn doing it. It was like magic to me. So screen capping something because I'm bad.
Ryan, hi. I teach at autism resource services at my school, and we're always trying to find like new and innovative ways to try to get the kids to like participate in discussions. I think this is really great. And you said you do like school visits, like trainings, or
I haven't yet, but I'd love to try. I'd be happy to try and arrange it. If you want to send me an email, I can maybe try and make it work.
Yeah, or maybe just even virtual, just like a talk. Cause I volunteered to do this, but I don't know that anybody else did. And I have training as an English teacher. So I've done like Socratic seminar and all those other kind of things, but they don't do that with special ed teachers. So if we could do something like small scale for my teacher group, that'd be awesome.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, thank you, everyone. By all means, please send me an email at one of the links there, and I'll try and I'd love to get out to your school and just do it with you, So.
Okay.
All right. We'll chat though. Bye. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
See you, bud.
All right. Bye.
Thank you very much, Ryan.
Yes.
Bye.
Of course. course. Oh, thanks. Hi, Lisa. Hi, it's good to see you. Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so I'm going to continue to record. So this is a unique experience that you folks are very kind in the chat, but we also have people joining us. So we're starting a new one and bidding adieu to everyone who is leaving. If you're leaving, I do want to just echo, I know I've said this 88 times, but shoot me an email. I'd love to chat with you about seminar. If you're just joining us, welcome. And oops, here we go. Welcome. I will say that this session is still being recorded. I think you got that notification. Everyone in the meeting. I'm a little rusty on Zoom. You're going to have to forgive me. So you can definitely see behind the curtains right now. Here's my link of my list of links. So here's a link to today's stuff. Welcome. Hello, family. Hey. All right. So we got this weird space of starting one presentation and finishing one with no downtime in the middle is kind of blowing my mind from a perspective presenter's point of view. So I'm going to give it a moment, don't mind, and I will share these links with you. So welcome to everyone who's joining. And you'll see a link to today's presentation and also a link to the agenda and resource bank. And actually, if you don't mind, while we're still letting some folks in, you can go ahead and get started. If you don't mind introducing yourself in the chat by answering 4 questions. Everything that you see on screen, basically. Oh, and this meeting is being recorded. I always forget. I'm rusty on Zoom. I forget to say that. So the 4 questions you see in front of you, first off, your name, your pronouns, where and what you teach, and then a simple answer to the connections question for today, which is, when you were a student, what was your favorite class to talk in? When you were a student, what was your favorite class to talk in? If you just want to drop a brief introduction to yourself in the chat over here. And you can see my answers, but my name is Ryan Acosta-Fox. He, him pronouns. I teach English at Northwood High School. And my brain is a little fried at the moment. Let's see. When I was a student, what was my favorite class to talk in? I mean, the answer I've said all along is debate class. I loved talking in debate. I was a very, very shy kid. And I had a really, really cool debate teacher who was really the first high school teacher. I moved around a lot when I was a kid because my dad was in the Navy. And he was the first teacher in a long time I had really connected with. And I just debate was an eye-opening experience for me. I had some cool English teachers, but I frankly learned a lot more about reading and writing in debate class than I did. Yes, of course. Excellent answers. So. Loving the answers I'm seeing, everyone. I do think we just had a few people join us. So yeah, I see that a lot, that it kind of is about the teacher, right? So if you have an awesome teacher, that helps, right? So yeah, cool. I'm gonna go ahead and drop the chat, the links here. Also, if you're just joining, I'm gonna give it like another 30 seconds or so. Love the shouts out to English class. Everyone has a English teacher who changed their life, in my experience, maybe. All right, got a couple people joining, so I'm gonna give it about 20 more seconds before we move on and talk about the agenda and the objective for today's discussion about student-centered discourse. Welcome. Awesome. Welcome. Here are the links. What we've been doing so far is we've been introducing ourselves by sharing out our answers to these questions. If you're just joining, my name is Ryan Acosta-Fox. he, him pronouns. I teach English at Northwood High School. And I want to talk about this connections question here. So before we get into the objective. The question I asked was, when you were a student, what was your favorite class to talk in? And what did I do there? Well, first, and kind of most importantly, I snuck in a little bit of context, right? I've loosely framed what we're going to talk about today. I've hinted at the subject matter. We're going to talk about talking and why students like talking and how best to get students to talk in a kind of organized pattern. So snuck in a little bit of context. I kept it short. You don't want to ask an essay question for the connection part, because that'll kind of, warm up or bell work or bell ringer or whatever you call it. It's not like a 40-minute lesson, part of your lesson, right? So keep it short. You want to avoid yes or no questions. You don't want it to be too short. I've found students, if you give them the option of a yes or a no, often they'll just say yes or no. But on that same subject, to kind of contradict point number 2, I would give it some space. If we were doing this in real life, in-person setting, and let's say we had a student who had this experience when they were talking in a class and a teacher berated them, and it was this, really not cool experience, and they really felt a need to share about it, and the sharing took like 2 minutes. Honestly, I would probably just let it go. I would give it some space. You never know what cool conversations or connections can be made from doing that, right? So that's where it kind of gets into the noticing step of like, I have to know, do I want to let this go on? Do I not? Unfortunately, today we can't do that because we have a pretty strict time limit. So I'm going to be sort of presenting a little bit more than demoing, but I'll talk more about that later. So the agenda for today, first off, I want to talk about the resources I'm going to share with you, which actually I think I already did share, but I might have missed a couple people. So I'm dropping some links in the chat if you missed them. Then I'm going to talk about the history and philosophy about these 2 different speaking styles, protocols, that I'm going to share with you today that have been a really, really big part of my teaching. I'll break down what those protocols are, Socratic seminar, and something experimental I'm calling connections. And then hopefully we'll have some time at the end with space for any questions. So I'll reserve the last few minutes for answering any questions. Of course, if we run out of time, or if you want to talk at greater length, just send me an email, or I'll send you my cell phone or whatever, and we'll chat for longer. So. But the objective for today is twofold. Drop the link again. I'm sorry, I'm a little out of Zoom practice, so it looks like I'm spamming the chat over there, so apologies. But by the end of this session, we will learn about a method of student-centered discourse that seeks to engage every voice in a whole class discussion. And if you like products, you will walk away from this with 168 lesson plans. 128 from the first Socratic seminar folder. I'll share why it's that precise of a number in a second. And then 40 from this new kind of experimental thing I'm trying called connections. Probably more importantly than 168 is the number 2. You're going to walk away with 2 different lesson plan templates that you could use and modify for your own classes. So in the agenda or linked here in the presentation, you'll find the seminar folder that has 128 lesson plans, the connections curriculum, 40 lesson plans, 2 different discussion logs, analog data trackers. We'll talk about that at the very end. And then 3 different templates, actually. The first is the new Socratic seminar template that I like. It's exactly the same. I just made some cosmetic changes to it and a few minor upgrades. But if you like the old Socratic seminar template that I'm going to talk about also, it works too. And then the very new connections discussion template that I finished a couple weeks ago and have demoed in my own classes 3 or 4 times, I think. So first, the history and philosophy behind both of these discussion strategies. So when I'll be brief. When I started, this is my 15th year teaching. And when I started teaching, I taught it for 8 years, first 8 years of my career at Washington High School in Kansas City, Kansas. We back then, the Kansas reading assessment was it had a lot of weight for our school, and our scores were low. So we wanted to improve them. And we knew of another school in Kansas City, Missouri, across the river, Van Horn High School, which was engaging in this thing called the Touchstones Curriculum, right? Touchstones discussion curriculum or whatever. So we thought, we want to try something. So we went over there. We knew the principal was the former Washington principal. He invited us over. We went and observed. And once a week in their homeroom classes, everyone was engaged in a discussion of one of the Touchstones lesson plans. So I got to observe a group of just random senior students discussing with authority. I think it was Aristotle. I know it was ancient Greek philosophy, right? And this was my third year teaching. So this was really, really a seminal moment, a watershed moment in my teaching career. I was still kind of learning how to teach, and it was sort of mind-blowing, and it vastly expanded the borders of what I thought was possible for students what kind of conversations I thought it was possible for students to engage in. To see students talking about ancient Greek philosophy with greater authority than frankly I could was really, really an exciting moment. So we knew we were onto something, or Van Horn was onto something. So we thought, we got to do this, right? So we did. We came back to Washington High School and we tried out the Touchstones curriculum. And what it looked like was once a week in homeroom. We had homeroom advisory twice a week. Once for 60 minutes and once for 30 minutes. So if you're not a fan of homeroom, if you can imagine, it was a lot of homeroom happening. But once a week, we had a discussion. Everyone in the school participated in the same discussion seminar. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone, every teacher, everyone who had a homeroom, right? So, English teachers, math teachers, gym teachers, ROTC teachers, and then every student from your college lit seniors to your quote unquote on level freshmen. I do not like that phrase on level, but it is what it is. Everyone in the building was participating in this. And we liked it. There were positives and negatives, right? So the Touchstones curriculum was very, very big on context-free a context-free philosophical focus. A lot of ancient people who have been in the quote unquote traditional canon for a long time. So texts from Aristotle, Socrates, Galileo, Descartes, names like that. We kept some things from their curriculum, but we also noticed some things that we wanted to modify to better represent our student body. So we kept their format, their basic format, although we altered it a bit. Start with an initial question, you have a central text, and then you finish with some reflection questions, and you have a whole group sharing out round. And we also kept the idea of basically context-free philosophical issues. We resisted the urge to talk about current events. Every time we tried something close to that, we felt that students were just coming in with preformed ideas that they got from the news, or YouTube wasn't really a thing back then, but I assume today it would probably be from something like that. So, or TikTok, I don't know. But we wanted to modify it a bit to better represent our student body. This Washington High School is a very diverse school, 70% African-American, 20% white, 10% Hispanic, 10% Asian. And to only have people from the quote unquote traditional canon felt like we were doing a disservice to our, to representation. So we updated the text from classic to modern. We diversified voices as much as we could. And we also wanted to make sure we were diversifying content. And by which I mean, we didn't want to fall into the trap that, you like have a text from Martin Luther King Jr. and he's going to talk about the Black experience in the United States. And then we go back to Galileo and he's talking about some sort of philosophical principle. And then we come to Maya Angelou and she's talking about the Black experience in the United States. And then we go to, Descartes, who talks about the nature of what it means to be in the self and blah, blah, blah. We wanted to make sure that we weren't limiting what someone could talk about. There's no reason why Maya Angelou or Martin Luther King couldn't talk about, the seminar I'm going to share with you today, Maya Angelou talks about the concept of home and whether or not we can ever return home. She has a really interesting take on it, right? And we wanted to make sure we weren't being in any way limiting or condescending, so we did that. And as a result, we learned kind of after we did it a few times and liked it, that, you know what, we're going to need 4 of these, because if a freshman can't repeat the same lesson plan the next year, so we needed 32 per year. That gives us 128 unique lesson plans, no skips, no repeats, a 4-volume curriculum. So you could start as a freshman and never repeat a lesson plan up through your senior year. We kind of jumped into this without super knowing our philosophy, but over time we honed it, and I tried to convey it as best as I could. And what I would say the philosophy behind this way of organized talking is that it's founded on the idea that through their words, ideas, and questions, students can reveal themselves not just to others, but also to themselves. It's a curriculum that rather than teaching students how to think, the goal really is to create and facilitate a dialectical space for students to interrogate their world and understand it as an individual and shared experience. We really didn't talk about social emotional learning at the time, but in retrospect now, I really think students are doing all of the key elements of social emotional learning in a good seminar experience, right? They're building and maintaining a community. They're developing healthy emotional and intellectual relationships with peers. They're managing responses to others. And they're also identifying ways that they can grow personally, or that the group can grow collectively. As one of my favorite people in the world, Dr. Netzer, who the principal at Van Horn and the erstwhile principal at Washington, as he puts it, once a person begins to live the life of the mind, there is no going back. That is a direct quote from an email he sent me 13 years ago that I had a lot of fun fishing out. So, okay, so that's our philosophy behind it. I'm going to talk about the 2 different styles of discussion: Socratic seminar and connections. I'm going to share a link here in just one moment. But a Socratic seminar has 6 steps. The way we do it takes about 45 minutes. Start with the connection question, like we've modeled today. You read and annotate a short passage of about 150 to 250 words in length on average, I would say. You come up with an individual question, you share it, we go around and share the questions, and then we have a largely unstructured large group conversation for 15 minutes, and then we reflect for 10 minutes. So I'm going to share a link with you. Here is a Socratic, and actually I forgot about this. I keep forgetting about this, but it'll take you to something, a teacher guide. And as I said, we did this, I was the Socratic seminar coordinator at Washington. We did this every teacher in the building. So we did have a few resistant. Most teachers, I would say, bought in. It was a process, but there were some teachers who were resistant to it. So our goal with this was to make it as user-friendly as humanly possible. So we included a teacher guide here that you can use. Hopefully it's useful. At this point, I kind of skip past it and go to the seminar. And on that same note, one thing I want to point out is that in the interest of user-friendliness, this is really, it can be a pretty effective, you can almost think of it like it's a really effective sub-plan, by which I mean it is verbatim. As long as you have yourself prepared to facilitate and you have a timer, you could pretty much read this word for word to go through the seminar, right? So by what I mean is step 1, I would say step 1, we're going to start with the connections question. Take about 5 minutes in a discussion circle. Everyone shares a short answer to the question below. It says, in this piece, Maya Angelou writes a letter to herself as a child. Where's one piece of advice you would give your younger self? And then I would say, so take a couple minutes, write down 1 or 2 sentences, jot down some notes, and then we'll go around in a circle and share. And just if you missed that part, you'll notice that the connections question sort of hints at the text we're going to look at today, kind of sneaks in a little bit of context, right? So we'll go around and share. I'll tell students, talk for about 5 or 10 seconds, just share a short answer, right? We'll move on to step 2, where we read and annotate. We'll take about 8 minutes, and I'll say one person reads the piece out loud, then everyone silently annotates, marking at least 3 things and writing a comment for each. Early in the year, I will probably be the person who reads out loud, but I like to hand that off to students over time. Reading a passage of this length will probably take about 1 to 2 minutes, 2 minutes, even if you're reading kind of slower, which I like to do. And that leaves us with about 5 to 6 minutes of silent annotation time. Usually I'm demonstrating the best way to get students to silently annotate is to silently annotate for them. I can't explain it. It just works that way, right? So I'll do that a little bit, and then I'll kind of glance around, see how students are doing. And I'm keeping an eye on the timer, and I'll say, I like to blend step 2 and 3. So I'll say, I'm looking around and I see about maybe 50% of our pencils are still moving. So if you haven't yet, you want to go to step 3 for to share an individual question. So create an individual question you could share with the class and write it in the space below. There's an example here. Do you feel that you can always go home after you leave? And I might adjust the timer if I need to, or I'm kind of noticing where we're at, right? So, so there's that. So that brings me to step 4. And I want to pause here for a moment, because this to me is the sort of magic step. And I mean, my computer is not working, so I'm not going to highlight it, but there it is. Step 4. I mean that word magic very directly. I can't explain it. The only way I can explain it is by anecdote. When I was a kid, I was very, very shy in high school. Like I said, I moved around a lot. By the time I got to high school, it's kind of hard to find friend groups because friend groups had been formed for a long time. So as a shy kid, having done this before, I am staring at step 5 like a deer in headlights, the large group conversation. It's unstructured. It can be kind of awkward. You leave it to students to sort of direct it. I'm really nervous about that. I don't want to share out loud in that. So kind of like a sleight of hand, like a magician's trick. I'm not really paying attention to step 4. And this says each seminar member shares her, his, or their, in the updated version, question. Note 5 interesting questions by writing down the speaker's name. I can't explain it, but when I do this, I tend to get 95% to often 100% completion of students sharing their question out loud. And the level of question, like the depth of question, is so mind-blowing. It's really amazing how it's constantly, I don't know how to put it, reinvigorating. It's magic, like the level of questions students come up with just when you give them the space and a model to do it is really, really kind of breathtaking. I don't know how else to put it. One thing I'll note here is it says, note the questions by writing down the speaker's name. That's really important. I always like to underline that for kids, because don't write down the whole question. If you do that, you will miss 5 questions in a row, right? Trying to remember it. So just write down their name, say, and then during the round, you could say, Amy, I really liked your question, but I forgot what it was. Could you share it for us? And then you get Amy talking, right? Hopefully. Then the large group conversation. This is the part that is a process, right? So it's largely unstructured. You're there as a facilitator. Towards the beginning of the year, you might need to be talking more. The goal would be by the end of the year, you're talking as much as any other participant. And that's it is a process. But I always feel like if I've gotten through step 4 and 100% of my students have shared, frankly, I think like the rest is cake. If it's valuable, if it's good, if it's a good conversation, awesome. If it's bad and you'll have bad conversations, it's a learning experience, right? It's a part of that process, right? It can be like structured chaos sometimes, right? There's too much for me to say about step 5 in the time we have, but I'd love to talk more with you about it. So if you want to talk about the ins and outs of different groups, every group is different. You'll have boisterous groups and dead silent groups. I'll talk more about that with you one-on-one. I'd love to. And we finish with a reflection round of writing in a journal. In the seminar, the 128 lesson plans, you'll see structured questions about the text. The newer version, I've kind of abandoned the structured questions about the text. We just talk about how we did as a seminar group. Did we reflect on our norms, which we set at the beginning of the year? How well do we follow them? What do we need to continue? What do we like about the conversation? Again, in the older version of it, we have some context. You can feel free to write that if you would like, but I don't think you necessarily need to do it, because the whole point is to have sort of a context-free discussion. So Okay, I want to talk about this thing I'm really excited about, the connections sort of experimental protocol that I've done in my class a few times. And I will say I'm the English resource teacher here at Northwood, but I'm stepping down to be just a regular classroom teacher again, which is I'm very, very excited about. And one part of that is I think I'm gonna have my own homeroom advisory for the first time since Kansas City, my own official like homeroom advisory for the first time since Kansas City 8 years ago. And I thought, how could I make we do homeroom advisory 30 minutes here at Northwood. And I thought, how could I make this a discussion seminar work in 30 minutes? And that got me thinking about how could I modify the seminar thing to work in 30 minutes? Because I knew I couldn't do a 45-minute lesson plan in 30 minutes. It just wouldn't work, right? So what I did is I came up with something I'm calling connections, right? Same scripted questions, 5-minute connection round that looks identical, 15-minute discussion and annotation round, and then you finish with a reflection question. A sample seminar looks like this. Oops. Go. So I want to walk you through it really briefly. You start with the connections question is identical in the structure. In a circle, everyone shares a short answer to the question below. In this reading, Gloria Anzaldúa talks about how important language is to her. Have you ever been mocked because of the way you speak or write? I will say this lesson comes from like unit 3. So that's could be a triggering question. So I might not ask it week 1. I kind of got to feel out my group, but yeah. So I do the same thing where I hint at the passage to come. In the discussion and annotation round, one person reads the short passage out loud, and then I gave students a framework, a literal frame, I guess, for annotating. So I've both shortened the text a little bit. It can be as short as a quote, as long as maybe a short paragraph. I don't know a word count, but my guess would be 50, 60 words would probably be about max. And then what I've done is frame the annotation for students. So I'll say space for questions, confusions, similarities, and differences. So what questions does the reading spark? What parts of it were confusing? How are you like the speaker? How are you different from the speaker? If you're doing this in like a science class or health class or something like that, or even an English class, this is actually a homeroom lesson plan. Maybe you could change the framework a little bit. Right? I like the questions part, but let's say you were looking at figurative language. So, you could have imagery down here. What imagery do you notice? And word choice, what words do you see that blah, 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 tone, what parts of this contribute to the overall tone? I don't know, something along those lines. I haven't thought of it specifically in that framework yet. So, and then we finished with some reflection questions. What was your, so I'm just going to ask students to write down an answer to one of those questions below, and then we just go around and share out. There's not really a lot of space to journal. So I thought, why don't we just share out loud? So what was your favorite question from today? Why were you interested in it? What did you like about the discussion? How could it have gone better? Was there anything you wanted to say, but you felt like you couldn't? Did you change your mind about the reading after talking about it? So this is experimental. I've only done this about 4 times, I think, but I really like it. It's worked really well those times. The one thing I will say is that it took a lot of modeling on the framework, which is to be expected. I was a little bit out of the blue during Q4 to build some new routines, but it was a valuable bit of modeling. So I had to kind of model for them on a whiteboard, questions, similarities, differences, confusions. I did a lot of thinking aloud those days. So I like it. So, and lastly, I have this analog data tracker that is definitely analog. It is not yet digitally accessible. It's something you would print out and then, handwrite, kind of holistically can keep track of data this way. So I like to note student names. Usually I'll write initials, number of comments that they're saying. I like to note, are they called on or were they speaking unprompted? Then I keep a little circle in the top right of this so that I'll put initials here, and it helps me. I'll kind of draw a line to connect, parts of the conversation, so I can see patterns that are developing. So like maybe the conversation is just staying over here, for example. I don't know. So, okay. That was fast. So the last thing, I'm done, but I wanted to say that if you have questions, talking about seminar is my favorite thing in the world. I will drop everything to do it for real, for real. If you want to talk at greater length about it, please send me an email at ryan.acosta-fox@mcps. I'd love to chat. If you want to talk over the phone, or if you want to Zoom, or at the end of the year, I can kind of be creative about maybe I could even get over to your school. I don't know how, but I'm speaking it into existence. I'd love to come and do a Socratic seminar with your students, if at all possible. I'm saying that, I don't know if it's going to happen, but let's try. And that's it. I'll stick around if you don't mind filling out this survey. If you had time, and I'm going to stick around for questions if anyone had any questions. But other than that, I think that's about it. So, yay, that's it for me. So thank you so much for being here, everyone. And oh yes, of course, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Oh, nice comments in the chat. I appreciate it. Thank you. Still here to answer questions. I am going to fiddle around with Zoom a little bit. All right. Thanks all. Thank you, everybody. Oh, absolutely. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, everybody. How do I do